but I want to get back on the road with this. That's not an expression. Back on track, back on point. I want to start doing these again. I want to get more regular with it. I want to make this a thing. I want to pick a time. By the way, if you're someone that I have sent this to and asked, what you think, if you'd be interested, let me know what time of day would be good for you to come be a part of a daily discuss the news' day's events type show. I don't know if, you can see it. I don't know if of day. You can see my mouse over here, but you lose it once it gets over here. Of a daily discuss the news' day's events type show. Stop talking. Sorry. Anyways, over in this, region over to the right, the big blue section, that is going to be a. God, I can't have me on every screen. Sorry, everybody. That big blue section is going to be like a chat box, but for now, no one is watching me, so there is no chat feature. Anyways, let's get into what happened today, because I'm doing this 6 hours later than I was supposed to. We're already way behind schedule on the day. Gonna race through this a little bit, so sorry if you kind of missed some of the stories, but hopefully you should be able to figure out where to find them based on the headline and website and URL that are in the box over to my, I don't know which direction that is, right, I guess, even though it's left. Anyways, so today, in my mind, the biggest story is that Facebook has finally rolled out their expanded like button reactions, or as I prefer to call them, emoji reactions, and I did not come up with that. That's something a lot of people say. So you see, there's the 6 different emojis here. There's like, love, haha, wow, sad, and angry. So there's no dislike button, which a lot of people are upset about. They tested it in Spain and Ireland first to, I guess get like a big sampling of white people, what different kinds of white people thought about the emoji reactions. So from Tom Allison, who's the director of engineering for the newsfeed, everyone's had one of these posts in newsfeed where they're like, I want to respond in some way, but like doesn't feel appropriate at all. The classic example is someone's grandmother dying, and you're like, You're like, I'm so sad my grandmother died. You should be sad, you little shit. Instead, now you can go with sad, and then you don't feel like an asshole, but you get to express your sadness, which I guess is nice. And to pick these, they looked at the one-word comments people were leaving the most on their friends' posts. So, my first instinct just now was to be like, you can't just say I'm sorry for your loss on the dude's page when he his grandmother dies. But I think that is kind of, what people have been doing. They've been writing these very simple messages, and now Facebook is trying to make it slightly easier with the emoji reaction. You just type sad instead of I'm sorry for your loss. The question is, to a certain extent, the reason writing I'm sorry for your loss is meaningful is because someone took the time out of their day to stop and think of words to put to the feeling that was inside their body and then send it through the internet to you. And if it's just, you hover over the like button and you click sad, does that mean as much? You're going to get more of them, but does any of it mean anything at all? The way people like shit very often is they just run through and they're like, Instagram, of course, is the worst. It's like, just double tap, double tap, double tap, double tap. That's a thing, I saw it, double tap. And on Facebook, I think there's definitely some of just like, oh, I've seen this, and yay, like. And now it's like, oh, sad face. And the next story, it's like Donald Trump, and it's like, grr, angry face. Mad, angry face. So, on the one hand, it feels like they are greatly enriching the sort of quality of conversation by moving it beyond just like or nothing. On the other hand, aren't they kind of sucking the air out of the real conversation, the real sort of emotional connection with people? I don't know. Time will tell, and actually, no, it won't. We'll never know. But we'll argue about it a lot, and that'll be fine. So 2 reactions were trimmed from the initial list, yay and confused. Yay people would just use love instead. I guess they figured, and confused was confusing. Because life is beautiful. Like is still on top, and then you on mobile you got a long press to get the rest of the thing. On web or on desktop you just hover. So yeah, that's that thing that happened. We got emoji reactions moving on to our second story, which is obviously of greater significance, but is also sort of an uncertainty. Wow, that's an awesome picture of John Kerry. What is that expression on John Kerry's face? That needs to be a meme right there. What is I don't know what's going on. I don't know what he is feeling, but it is China did bad. I'm John Kerry. Anyway, China has sent several fighter jets to a disputed island in the South China Sea, threatening to escalate tensions with its neighbors and increase mistrust between Beijing and Washington, D.C. That's our headline here. So the Woody Island is the one in question. It's down here, you see. So we got the Philippines, Manila, Vietnam, kind of over here. Just sort of, the South China Sea. This area we've been talking a lot about. Japan, obviously, way up here. So this is a massive shipping route right here. I'm sure they didn't. Yeah, they didn't really go. I want to say $3 trillion. That might just be oil. Let's see. South China Sea shipping value. Let's see if that pulls it up. Let's just see real quick. It's definitely going to be easier to get the number for like amount of oil that goes through. Oh wow! So here we're talking about. That's interesting. Everyone talks about the sort of naval hegemony and controlling trade through the region, but here they're actually making the point there's a lot of resources in the sea itself. So anyways, I don't know. I should have gotten that for you ahead of time, but I don't know exactly how big of a trade route it is. I know the Strait of Malacca, which is farther down, not really up what we're talking about, but is this? I mean, let's just pull up the biggest oil trade routes map, because that's always interesting to look at and just remind ourselves about. That one looks good. Looks like it's just with this one. No. Although here, we do look at this map of the sort of the trade routes. Basically, if you want to connect China, Asia to Africa, Middle East, really Europe too, you're coming through the South China Sea, Australia, Southeast Asia. There's a whole part of the world where half of the people are. Depends on the South China Sea. This is not a trivial neighborhood. It's so far away, and it's not the North Atlantic where we traditionally think of big business being done. It is really the trade route that half of the people of the world use to trade with each other overseas. Obviously, they're really all in this land mass right here, so they can just sort of walk. Here we go. This is the image that I'm kind of looking for. Excuse me 1 second. Am I gonna sneeze? I don't think I'm gonna sneeze. Okay, no sneeze. Anyways, Strait of Malacca, 15.2 million barrels per day of crude going through there, 17 going through Hormuz, 4 going through the Bab el-Mandeb, which is the one that we fight with Iran about, 4.5 going through the Suez Canal. This is a major fucking trade route. And then, of course, apparently there's also like resources under the ground. So a big deal. Anyways, let's get to what actually happened here today. So China's been building islands there, right? And yesterday we had a big story about them putting radars on the islands that they've been building, which would allow them to much more easily keep track of who's going where, and then sort of exert their influence when they wanted to. Today we've got jets being positioned on the islands. Precise number of planes is not clear. It's in the single digits. The timing is especially interesting because really what we're talking about here, we're not talking about a war, right? We're not, China is not about to bomb Cambodia from the, what was it, Woody Island? So no one's worried about the location of, no one is worried that this jet is here and it's going to take off and bomb somebody. What the issue here is who gets to control this trade route, the US or China? And it's really just this, somewhere between like a pissing contest and a dick measuring contest. It's it's who gets to be the big dog on the top of the hill, to just complete my tour of mixed metaphors. And so the reason that they're doing this today is significant is that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi arrived in Washington yesterday to meet with John Kerry. He's supposed to have all kinds of diplomatic meetings. And for China to make a big dick move like that right on the eve of these kind of meetings is a big dick move times 2. So they're getting bold. And it's a big sign that they, are not afraid of us, that they're willing to stand up to us, which says, the reason we are in charge is because Saudi Arabia trusts us to protect their oil shipping. Companies trust us to protect their factories in whatever country. We are the ones that everyone is the most afraid of, so everyone trusts us to protect their shit. China not being afraid of us disrupts that narrative and allows them to, maybe weasel in a little bit on our, because, think of a company like Nike. Nike is American. Why? Because most of their owners are nominally American, but they're in part of this global superclass that could pick up and move wherever they wanted if they found somewhere better. Because, most of their consumers have historically been American, but that's not even probably, I don't have numbers for Nike that I specifically picked, but consumption is moving to the 3 billion people in China and India, so that's not a big deal. We definitely don't make their shit anymore. So what makes Nike an American company? It's that they trust America to be the one that says you can't storm into our factory and take it over. If they trust China for that instead, now Nike's a Chinese company. So they had a press conference on Tuesday where John Kerry called on all countries who contest various parts of the South China Sea not to escalate tensions by provoking their neighbors. This is an interesting move to me, not in that it's a good move, in that it's a bad move. So we have this press conference here where John Kerry looks like this motherfucker, and he's going, you guys, let's not provoke, let's not cause a fight. And he's talking to, Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines, not so much Taiwan, Japan. He's talking to all these countries that are involved in this area, and he's saying, look, guys, let's not make this a fight. But the thing is, China is making this a fight. I mean, we basically got a Jeb Bush-Trump scenario here, where China is moving the fucking front line farther and farther and farther every day. And these guys are getting scared, right? Vietnam, Cambodia, Philippines, they are not really excited about the prospect of belonging to China instead of America. And, well, I don't know about that. But basically the idea is China is being an aggressor, and John Kerry is saying, let's just be friends, everybody. And the question is, does that make us look weak in a way that, the aforementioned fear fades and China gets to take control? So then this one last little detail. Wang's trip to Washington was billed primarily as a chance for the two countries to discuss approaches to North Korea's nuclear weapons in its recent satellite launch. But Wang's scheduled visit to the Pentagon to meet with Ash Carter, the U.S. Defense Department chief, was canceled on Monday. It's not clear which side would cancel the visit, which was explained by the Pentagon press secretary as a scheduling issue. But odds are it is some kind of, they canceled them, you can cancel another meeting to meet with China. They didn't want to meet. And so there is some kind of tension building and brewing here. And that is scary when we're talking about, the second biggest oil trade route in the world. So, let's move on to France and Libya. So apparently French special forces have been ripping up the countryside in Libya. Days after U.S. airstrikes destroy one of their nearby compounds, Islamic State militants seized part of a coastal city of Sabratha. This is a kind of weird article. It's sort of 3 articles combined into one. But the part that is interesting to me, so Benghazi was very gloriously liberated from ISIS completely this week. And everyone's been celebrating. They're free of this great scourge. And in large part, obviously the main factor there is the Libyans fighting ISIS on the ground. However, we've been helping out with, some bombs falling from the sky, and apparently France also has been helping out. So really, mostly what I'm interested in tracking here is the sort of global fight against ISIS, who's involved, who's doing what. We get so much shit in Syria because Putin was like, hey, I don't want these guys in Syria, so he just, not ISIS, the rebels, so he just came in, bombed the shit out of them, and now he's winning in Syria. There's an argument that that's what we did in Libya. Certainly not to the extent that he did. It's certainly a lower stakes conflict as well. But I think, we deserve a little credit for kicking some ISIS ass in Libya. So Le Monde says special forces units alongside the DGSE, which is France's External Security Directorate, have been in Libya for several months and coordinated the November strike on Derna, which I guess is a city in Libya, which killed the most senior ISIS leader in the country. Libyan sources have reported that a small French detachment has been operating from Benghazi's Benina airport, assisting pro-Tobruk forces combating ISIS in battles in the city. Let's figure out who the fuck this Tobruk guy is. I guess it's a city. Yeah, it's a city. So basically the, non-ISIS folks in the city. UK Foreign Office Minister Tobias Ellwood declined to comment on British Special Forces operations, but said the RAF is flying missions over the country in preparation for possible attacks on ISIS. Italy announced on Monday that it would allow armed U.S. drones to strike Libyan targets from bases in Sicily. So what we've got here is France, the UK, and the U.S., that great triumvirate, bombing ISIS in Libya, and Italy is helping them out by letting them use, if you look at a map of the Mediterranean, Sicily is a great staging area for, attacks on Libya. Oh my God, Google, zoom out faster. Okay, so we're looking. Libya is here, Tripoli's over here, that Tobruk, where's Benghazi's over here, Sicily is right here. So without Italy's help, we'd be bombing from here, we'd be bombing from here. Let's be realistic, we'd be bombing from here, we'd be bombing from here, but Sicily is a great staging spot for Libya. So that was nice of Italy to let us use it. America's special envoy from combating ISIS, Brett McGurk, told reporters in Washington that the terrorist group have now prioritized Libya for recruiting, which is why we're so concerned about Libya. Obviously, we don't want, ISIS to add to its territory, but one of the main things is that they're trying to bring foreign fighters into Libya. They're using Libya as their new calling card. Things are not going well for them in Syria. Things are not going great for them in Iraq. It's not a great sales pitch to say, hey, come to Libya and come to Syria and Vladimir Putin will bomb you. It's a much, much more appealing sale to say, hey, Libya is split apart. They can't, they've got two parliaments. They can't take control of the country. There's all kinds of chaos over there. This is where we strike. And so they've been luring in all these people to take control of Libya, and we are now bombing Libya to sort of put a stop to that. So Washington's hope for crushing ISIS in Libya rests on persuading the parliament to end its civil war with the Islamist-led Libya Dawn Group, which holds Tripoli, so that the country's militias can concentrate on fighting the terrorists. But the prospects of a deal faded on Tuesday, with Tobruk postponing a vote on a unity government amid allegations from some MPs of intimidation in the parliament chamber. So Tobruk is, I guess, one of the two governments. I don't know if we've got, let's see where they first explain. No, they don't tell us who Tobruk is. So I think what we're dealing with is the other, the Second Libyan Civil War, ongoing conflict between four rival organizations seeking to control Libya. Here we got a map. Now I don't know which one is Tobruk. Let's see where we got Tobruk coming up. The conflict escalated on July 13, 2014, when Tripoli's Islamist and Mizratan militias launched Operation Libya Dawn. Ooh, okay, that got really big. To seize Tripoli International Airport, capturing it from the militia, yada, yada, yada. So we've got the General National Congress, which threw out the June election, discarded it. And they reconvened as the new general. I love, God, it's so hard. They make it so hard to keep track of these things. It's such a great tactic. So now we're this guys, and now we're that guy. Anyways, so those guys are the Council of Deputies who control Tripoli. And then what? Oh, they voted themselves to replace the Council of Deputies, which was okay. So basically, Tobruk is the guys that don't control Tripoli. That's the takeaway here. So is that the end of the story? Yeah, that's the end of the story. So a little bit of order coming to Libya. but not really, as France, the UK, and America have started bombing ISIS there and gotten them out. And hopefully the two, major governments can find some kind of agreement, but let's not hold our breaths. So, next story. Saudi and the United Arab Emirates ban citizens from traveling to Lebanon. Bahrain also joins travel ban after Saudi Arabia halted $4 billion in aid to the Lebanese army in response to their hostile Hezbollah position. So, again, your brief little background here. The Middle East is currently split between Sunni Saudi Arabia and Iranian Shias. The Saudi Arabian alliance is definitely bigger and probably more powerful, and also is on America's side, which is always nice. Iran basically has them, Lebanon, and the Hezbollah group in Lebanon, which is often called Iran's puppet army in Lebanon. And then they're kind of backed by Russia and Syria, or Syria's on their side too, the Syrian government, Bashar al-Assad, and Russia. So that's kind of the other axis. And they're fighting in Yemen, they're fighting this proxy war, they're fighting a proxy war in Syria. That is, the dominant conflict in the Middle East. And as a little tiny thrust in that fight, Saudi Arabia is banning its citizens from even traveling to Lebanon. And also stopping aid to the Lebanese security forces. So, a while ago, all of them were kind of on the same side against Israel, and now they've kind of given up on that. In fact, I think I was seeing some stuff the other day about how Saudi Arabia and Israel are actually kind of becoming friendly now because they both hate Iran so much. That's how big of a deal the Iran-Saudi Arabia conflict is. The UAE also banned its citizens and reduced its diplomatic presence in Beirut, capital of Lebanon. Bahrain urged citizens. So Bahrain kind of took the pussy move. It was like, hey guys, don't go to Lebanon, please, because then our friends Saudi Arabia, they wouldn't like it one bit. And they also said, if you're there, you should come home. Come home real quick. So then basically you just get a bunch of, people showing support. The last big thing in the conflict was the Saudi Arabian embassy in Tehran was sort of stormed by Iranian citizens. As far as I can tell, that was not a Iranian organized government thing. It was just, people were really pissed off at Saudi Arabia. Of course, how much the Iranian government pissed, riled up the people, hard to say. And then that was very much motivated by Saudi Arabia killing this very famous Shia leader, allegedly for terrorism, probably just for, dissent. So, it's also worth mentioning Lebanon is not fully in Iran's camp. There is a big divide in Lebanon where Sunnis and Shias are kind of fighting for control of the government. Hezbollah is very much Shia, very much on Iran's side, but the government itself is not. So there's not quite a proxy war yet, but a proxy, yelling match going on in Lebanon between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So let's turn over to Syria now. They're working on this ceasefire. We're going to get to a little bit more of it in a second. But most people don't like the idea of this ceasefire, largely because it's not really binding enough, and there's, on the one hand, some people think Russia only agreed to it because they've already accomplished all their aims, and they're like, yeah, sure, we'll stop bombing people. We have everything we want. Some people think that, there's an exclusion for ISIS. Everyone's still allowed to fight ISIS. And that's really all Russia's ever claimed to be doing in this situation, is fighting ISIS. So, what's to stop them from just continuing to bomb rebels and saying, no, we bombed ISIS? Nothing is the answer, except that maybe we back out of the ceasefire, in which case, who gives a shit in the first place? So, today, Tayyip Erdogan, president of Turkey, says that he thinks that the Kurdish militia should be excluded from the ceasefire, which are the guys that he's trying to fight there. So it's not a ceasefire if you carve out exceptions for everyone you're fighting. Like, World War II, if we had a ceasefire, but there was an exception where Americans could kill Nazis and Italians and Japanese, that's not a ceasefire. And that's basically what Erdogan is asking for. Like, hey, I understand, there'll be ceasefire, but let us kill... I can't do accents, I'm But let us kill the bad guy. And so, yeah, thanks for going. So John Kerry is talking about what's going to happen if the ceasefire and the peace talks that involve fall apart. And his apparent plan B is to partition Syria up in a bunch of different groups. This article isn't going to tell us what those groups would be. I imagine the Kurds would get apart, there'd be some rebel group that would get apart, and then Bashar al-Assad and the existing Syrian regime would get the vast majority of the country. So just real quick running through this. He doesn't think it's a solution, and he won't give details, but he does think that it's wrong to assume that Barack Obama would not countenance further action. In other words, if the ceasefire falls apart, if the peace talks fall apart, we're still going to do something. He just won't really say what. I guess it's, you know, a little bit of a threat because, as we just talked about, the ceasefire is getting a lot of flack and kind of falling apart. And so he's just trying to put a little, you know, teeth into the deal. He says he'll be meeting with Russia and other world powers in Geneva in the next few days to discuss the modalities of the ceasefire that was agreed to on Monday and is due to come into force on Saturday, which is another point worth mentioning. They set the ceasefire to go into effect in like 7 days. So basically everyone just gets to get all their, you know, last little bit of killing and ratchet up the thing and then take a little breather is kind of what it is. It's not a very significant agreement, basically. Cessation of hostilities agreed in a phone call between the U.S. and Russian presidents Obama and Vladimir Putin specifically excludes Islamic State, announced Nusra Front, and other terrorist organizations identified by the UN Security Council, as we were just talking about. Serious doubts that ceasefire will hold or be jointly enforceable by the U.S. and Russia because of conflicts. This is all stuff that I just sort of told you guys. This is the first time John Kerry has spoken of partition, although some think Putin would be content to see this happen, which kind of makes sense, right? I mean, it's kind of unclear what exactly his, at least to me, where his love for Bashar al-Assad comes from. Presumably, Assad has control over certain resources that he cares about, and he's willing to, you know, break off small chunks of the other parts of Syria to give to, say, the Kurds and the rebels, as long as Bashar gets to hold on to the important parts. I know there's a naval base, air base over there that's one of Putin's key strategic positions. I'm sure he'd get to hold on, Assad would get to hold on to that. So the other fun thing is the Syrian government said opposition groups could not be allowed to use the ceasefire to strengthen their military positions, and this would be regarded as a breach of the agreement. So basically, if the Syrian soldiers, the rebels, jump, they flinch, if they move in the wrong direction, Syria gets to say, you broke the ceasefire and everything's back on. It's a terrible, I'm not saying I could do better, but it's a very weak agreement we've got going on here. Should not be inspiring a whole lot of hope for some kind of end to the Syrian conflict. So, speaking of entrenched conflicts that are going nowhere and don't really have much hope involved with them, let's turn to the United States Senate. So the headline here is the GOP opens new chapter in judicial nomination wars. It's not so much a chapter. Basically the idea is they've gone all in on denying even a hearing for any nominee. The argument here coming from Mitch McConnell is that it's, you know, ripping the Band-Aid off, basically. Hoping to limit the political pain to a span of weeks instead of letting Democrats milk the issue for months. Basically, he's saying, right now, no, definitively not going to hear anybody from anyone. And then, you know, Obama's going to nominate someone and he gets to go like, you know, nope, sorry, not going to talk about it, already said, instead of having to give them a hearing and then people get to know them and, you know, maybe learn to like them, who knows what kind of thing happens, and then all of a sudden, you know, this GOP looks obstructionist, and that's the story, instead of just, no, sorry, not going to do it, we already said, we're sticking to our principles. So it's a big gamble. Obama is talking about all these, like, not quite conservative, but very moderate justices. He's trying to make himself look like the reasonable one, while the GOP is just like, nope, la, can't hear you, la. The argument that makes sense for what McConnell's doing is that he very much sees this as, like, the defining fight of his Senate career, right? He's trying to fight for the next generation of the Supreme Court. And so he is willing to put all his chips on the table. He is willing to go all in on this and say, look, this is where we make our stand. unfortunately for him, 56% of Americans say the Senate should hold hearings, while only 38% they should wait till after the election. Even Fox News poll finds 62% agree with Obama and said Senate leaders have a responsibility to take action on the court vacancy now. 34% think Obama shouldn't be allowed to choose another justice. Whenever you see a poll where something comes in at 30%, I always, think of some line I heard somewhere. It's like, you get 30% of people on board with anything. You have any opinion and 30% of people are going to agree with it. So roughly the situation here is the crazy fringe thinks that the GOP is right to take this stand. And everyone else is like, look, guys, come on, just do your jobs. However, like we said, McConnell thinks this is the whole pot right here. This is worth everything. This is the kit, the caboodle, the kitchen sink, and the whole basket of eggs. So his strategy is, how do I make the fact that I'm taking an unpopular position on the most important issue hurt as little as possible? And I guess his strategy is, we're not even going to have a hearing. So he gets all of the Senate Judiciary Committee together, the Republicans on it, and he gets a bunch of big caucus. And they all agree, and they release a letter signed by all of the Republican members of the Judiciary Committee to agree they will not hold hearings on any Supreme Court nominee until after our next president is sworn in on the 20th of January, 2017. So that's going to be a showdown. We're going to have to, it's now on Obama to pick a nominee who can cause the Senate the most pain, or to rally the base for the election. Either way, there's so many different ways the scenario games out. I'm really excited to see where it goes next. I think it's gonna be fun. Okay, let's turn to the economy for a minute. Global stocks extend drop with oil as Brexit risks royal pound. Look into some more detail. Basically, we got crude falling below $31, pushing raw material producers even lower. The Dow average sinks more than 200 points as banks slide. So basically, plunging oil and concerns about slowing growth in China still dominating sentiment in global financial markets this year. Adding to the misgivings are Britain's referendum on EU membership, Brexit, the question of Brexit, and Jacob J. Lew's cool response to market turbulence and growing signs that the American political landscape will remain unsettled amid the race for president as Donald Trump took another step towards winning the Republican nomination. That's basically Saudi Arabia said they're not going to cut production. They're just going to stick with this freeze. So oil kept going down. Growth in China, more bad numbers coming out, and that makes everyone upset. Britain is scaring everyone by saying they're going to leave the EU, which would disrupt trade and has been bad for the pound and as well as the British economy, which is important to note because, in a very turbulent, uncertain time like this, what we call haven investments like British bonds, British currency, the pound, things like that are, oases in this desert of shittiness. And the fact that, Britain is getting a little more unstable is not encouraging to them. So what do we got here? Index, this is what index? S&P index has declined 1% in February, heading for a third straight monthly drop. Will be the longest slide in more than 4 years. Then also, I shouldn't have highlighted this. We're just repeating the thing we had above. Also worth noting, it's not just oil that's slipping. Miners and other commodity prices are going down a lot. Mining stocks leading the decline in the S&P, or in Stocks Europe. I'm not really sure, but yeah, Stocks Europe. Copper led losses in industrial metals. Copper is often used as kind of the benchmark metal commodity because it's so important for so many manufacturing production things. And basically there's so much copper sitting around in China doing nothing that there's very little demand for new copper, and that's bad. I could talk about pound sterling dropped 0.9%. Lower crude prices dragged on the currencies of oil exporters. So basically, the fact that oil is now worth less, bad for the economy of countries that depend on oil, like Russia and Malaysia. The Brazilian real slid 0.7% there. Great commodity country. Not quite, I don't think, so much about oil, but as the other metals and other things as well. They've got a whole host of political problems and shit there too. So Moody's cut their credit rating, which is bad. Bloomberg dollar spot index added 0.3%, basically on all the turmoil everywhere else. People sort of fled to the dollar. And the yen climbed versus all of its major counterparts there. They've been doing negative interest rates, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute, and that makes them a lot more appealing than a lot of the other countries where people can park money in bonds. But as we see here, government bonds climbed as the drop in oil prices dimmed the outlook for inflation, preserving the value of fixed payments on securities. In other words, if you buy a bond and there's a ton of inflation, what you're going to get back at the end is worth less. But now that we're seeing all these prices go down, the odds of inflation are lower, so the same bond is more appealing and is going to pay out more real money at the end. And so that sort of drives up demand for government bonds, as well also as the uncertainty, meaning that bonds are safe compared to all these other shitty things. In emerging markets, we got South Africa down 1%, India down 1.4%, Russia down 1.7%. These are indexes of their economies that kind of take broad looks at how they're doing. Gulf stocks down 1%, Saudi Arabia going down a lot, 1.3%, Dubai dropping 1.7%. That, of course, is based on the bad oil news. So overall, a rough day in the global economy. For everyone else, America, bad news for the rest of the world is good news for America. So good news for us, bad news for, the vast majority of humanity. So let's look at negative interest rates for a minute. Headline here, negative interest rates are weird, but that's not what's wrong with the global economy. There's nothing in that bottle of water. I just did that because I was hope, a brief moment of hope, but it was dashed. Okay. So basically, what we got here is that there's central banks are trying all kinds of things to pump money into circulation, get economies moving faster and faster, and it's not working. So the evidence it's not working, people are still buying government bonds issued by these countries, even though negative interest rates guarantee a loss of capital if they're held to maturity. Thus, people must be betting on some form of deflation, either through outright price declines or a surge in currency values. Moreover, very little in the way of conclusive evidence that negative rates in and of themselves are the solution to deflation. So you want prices to go up, right? You want that, it's a sign that there's more, more growth, more money, more value in things. At the same time, you don't want them to go up too much because then it's like, the money has become worthless. So there's this very delicate balancing act. People are trying to strike the exact right level of inflation. And we're coming in low, so people are putting out negative interest rates, which basically I'm not entirely sure what. I guess negative interest rates, like we were talking about before, it encourages people to invest even if the economy is bad, which is good and gets money moving and all that. But it doesn't seem to be working. And here, we have Keynes explaining from the 30s why, which is that when interest rates are close to zero, monetary becomes much less useful as a tool to reinvigorate the economy. When you're in a poorly edited article, course. When you're in a liquidity trap such as we are now, fiscal policy, aka government spending, is a far better way to juice economic growth. Then we have a whole bunch of economic super people like former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, the head of the biggest hedge fund, Ray Dalio, bond market maven Mohamed El-Erian, all basically arguing that central banks can't just pump out money. They can't just lend to private companies and expect them to stimulate the economy, because there's all kinds of things that those guys are going to do, financial tricks, buybacks, things like that don't really stimulate the economy, and that what we kind of need, the emerging census seems to be, is government spending on big projects that put money actually into people's hands and create actual value in the form of infrastructure projects and that. Big argument for Bernie Sanders there, really. I mean, Donald Trump wants to build a wall, but Mexico's going to pay for that. Otherwise, everyone's kind of saying, like, hey, let's keep things going as they are. And Bernie's the one saying, like, look, let's put out a ton of government spending. It'll be great for the economy. And everyone's like, no, it won't, except these guys who are like, yeah, it will, actually. But, of course, they won't support Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders is going to fuck up the banks. And, these guys don't really like the idea of fucking up the banks. So a tricky situation here we got going on without a clear, right path through it. And then we got three smaller stories I'm just going to run through real quick. You've probably heard this one already, but so obviously you're aware of this FBI Apple dispute where the FBI wants Apple to build a backdoor into the iPhone so it can get into the San Bernardino shooter's phone and figure out all of his shit. Her shit? I'm not sure if it's the dude or the chick. Anyways, so now we've got Apple saying that 11 times since September, FBI has requested access to phones. So this is not an isolated incident. And what they're especially pissed about is they're using this 227-year-old All Writs Act, which compels third party to assist authorities in their investigation and usually is a measure of last resort, but the FBI has been going straight to it with Apple. Now, that appears, this letter came from Mark Zwillinger, who is lead Apple counsel, appears to contradict the position articulated by White House spokesman Josh Earnest last week that the order sought by the DOJ in the case of Farook is limited in scope. He's arguing that it's just this one iPhone. Just this one, guys. Just unlock this one. We'll go away. We'll stop bothering you. And Apple's saying, no, bitch, you've been bothering us. This is the 12th time we're having this fight. We're not doing it anymore. You want to get in, you're going to have to fight us in public on this one. Now, the other defense the government has is that this is like an outdated phone. And so they're not, it's not going to hurt you going forward. We're not going to break your future stuff. We just want the old stuff. Just the stuff that, no one's really using anymore. Just let us into that one. Listen to that one. We'll be all good. Except according to Apple, the 12 phones in question go all the way to iOS 9.1, include the recent 6 Plus iPhone. And then again, Apple has this boilerplate warrant that they put out there, and they say, authorities, look, if you want to get into one of our phones, here's a warrant. Go to a court, get a judge to say that you get in, and yeah, maybe we'll unlock the door for you. It's objected in 9 cases. One, it was not provided a copy of the underlying motion, some kind of technical fuck up. And the other, the agent in question said she'd go use a warrant. So basically Apple's saying, look, we're happy to cooperate, but you guys just kind of got to do this the way that, is good and right and above board and not just sort of strong arm us into building back doors. So, again, Capers, who is U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, representing the government, of course, he says they've been inconsistent, so they've often complied with past all writs orders and only began seeking to fight those orders in court recently. In most cases, rather than challenge the orders in court, Apple simply deferred complying with them, basically dragged their heels and didn't do shit. The overwhelming weight of law and precedent continues to support the government's application in this case, which is kind of contradicted by this next sentence, which is that Orenstein, who is the judge, let's find this guy, James Orenstein, federal magistrate judge, who I guess, is the one involved here. He ruled in favor of Apple last year, saying they're a private sector company free to choose to promote their customers' privacy over the competing interest of law enforcement if they so choose. So there's at least a little bit of precedent on Apple's behalf, but it's probably true that what the U.S. attorney said about the overwhelming weight of precedent is still correct. The case before Orenstein last year asked Apple to assist in decrypting an iPhone running iOS 7, which the company said it wouldn't do. Orenstein supported their decision. There's nothing in the record to suggest that Apple has or wants the ability to defeat customer-installed security codes to access the encrypted data that its customers store on Apple devices after purchasing them. So basically what we've got is the sort of investigative policing arm of the government is being like, we need access to the shit. And the judicial branch, at least in the form of this Orenstein dude, is kind of upholding privacy and Apple's rights as a company. But of course, there's a big question, who's going to win in the end still. All right, let's turn to a sad story of drought in South America caused by climate change, pretty clearly. So for 2 years straight, this one farmer they're talking about lost his entire crop due to a prolonged drought. Hundreds of thousands of small farmers in Central America facing a food crisis. They live in the dry corridor of Central America, which stretches from low areas of the Pacific through the foothills of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and parts of Costa Rica. Let's get this on a map. So we're basically talking about this whole region down here, the whole of Central America, roughly. I mean, what did they just say? From the low areas of the Pacific through the foothills of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and parts of Costa Rica. That is seriously Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. So we're basically talking about this whole stretch is fucked. Last few years have been particularly dry as a result of El Nino, which of course is the abnormal warming of surface waters in the eastern Pacific Ocean, which, according to NASA, will continue into 2016, threatening to become the worst year on record. What raises sea level temperatures? That's global warming. So that's what we're talking about here, is Central American farmers getting decimated by global warming. Make no bones about it. Small farmers in Central America harvest their crops at the end of 2 planting seasons, first between May and August, second from September to December. And for 2015, the World Food Organization estimated that corn production from the first planting season would drop 8%. That's a lot. But in Guatemala, 80% of the first season crops in the dry corridor were lost. That's a lot more. 80% of the first season crops were lost. 154,000 families affected. El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua reported corn production drop-offs in excess of 60%. This is a massive drought. We happen, I believe, to be in gluts of wheat and corn at the moment, so worldwide we're still okay. But these guys can't exactly afford to import Midwestern wheat. So for the actual people here, this is a catastrophe. Abel Garcia, who heads the organization's risk assessment office, I believe the organization we're talking about is some farmers, something or other. It's no longer raining in the first few months of the year. Between July and August, it normally rains at least 11 days, but last year it rained only 3. To make matters worse, rains have become more irregular, making it difficult for farmers to know when to sow their seeds. If it rains too little or too much all at once, the topsoil erodes, which forces farmers to spend more on fertilizers. It's a whole big clusterfuck. Excuse me, then we got a few sad little facts here at the end. Before, I used to kill a pig every Saturday to sell the meat, and now I don't have enough money to buy animals. She estimated her family lost 80% of the crops they planted last year. They used to also harvest the tamarind ponds that grow in their backyard, but the drought eliminated that crop as well. This year, they'll diversify by planting squash along with the sesame. In the western part of the country, we can no longer plant corn, she said. We're planting plants more resistant to the drought, such as squash, but there is so much of it that prices have dropped. Basically, we're in interstellar in South America, in Latin America right now. They're all planting the one plant that can survive the shitty rainwater situation they've got. And it's basically, there's way too much of it. No one wants it, but it's all they've got. So that sucks. Okay, let's turn now to a Saudi Arabian oil man who showed up to a conference of oil people in Houston and said, you guys either have to fix your shit or go out of business. We're not going to help you. Yeah, that's basically the whole story. I'll just run through some of these quotes real quick. As many as 74 North American producers face significant difficulties in sustaining debt, according to credit rating firm Moody's. Shale explorers from Texas to North Dakota will be decimated in coming months amid a wave of restructurings and bankruptcies, according to a guy who helped create the shale industry. Declining spending, rising debts, and layoffs are starting to spread to Main Street, with the impact spreading from regional banks in Oklahoma to the economies of cash-strapped Venezuela and Brazil. This is basically a point saying that, oil and oil companies are intricately intertwined with our economy, and if oil companies start falling apart, they are not the only ones who feel the pain. It spreads, and it hurts other people too. The S&P 500 oil and gas index has fallen roughly 60% since mid-2014 to its lowest since 2009. That's a big deal. Oil and gas companies, lowest since basically the financial crash, the recession, the Great Recession. Debt of junk-rated U.S. oil companies is yielding more than 20%, highest in at least 20 years. That means that everyone has so little faith. And to be pointed out, these are junk-rated U.S. oil companies. So these are the ones that are in trouble. This is not, the industry as a whole. But the companies that are in trouble are in the most trouble they've been in since the 90s, which I guess is, not that long ago. It's been a pretty good time since then, but it's still scary. Basically, then we've got Saudi Arabia saying, look, we think freezing. We don't think we need to cut. We think just a freeze at the January level will be enough to stabilize the market. However, the International Energy Agency thinks that means there's going to be at least 2 more years of low prices. Oman. Oman seems like they're good dudes. They're the ones taking so many people from Guantanamo. And here we've got the Oman oil minister being like, look, OPEC, non-OPEC producers, you need to cut oil output by 5 to 10% if you want to stabilize the market. The problem, the reason no one will cut is because they cut and everyone else doesn't. The price still goes down and they just lose money. They're not actually, basically everyone has to get together and agree to a cut or it's not going to work. So no one is willing to do this except Oman. Oman's stepping up and being like, look, you guys, we got to cut. So that's good for Oman. Shale oil in the United States, I don't know how we're going to live together, said OPEC-centric Secretary General, probably a Saudi dude. And then we've got this great line. The way we're going to get together is the way we're going to live together is you're all going to die. Where is that line? Here we go. Naimi made clear, however, he knew how OPEC would coexist with high-cost producers like shale, putting as many companies as possible out of business. So that's roughly the situation, same as it ever was, really. Saudi Arabia trying to bankrupt shale companies because they want to dominate the oil market. So that's what we got for today. Kind of rough news day, but nothing too major. Lots of big conflicts going on in the world, lots to keep up with, and hopefully you will. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.